Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week.
We have a president who said that in Florida that it should be at least rescheduled and allowed to be used to its full potential for medical research. All the things we've been asking for.
That's Ohio Congressman Dave Joyce, the co-sponsor of the States Act 2.0, who was receiving an award from Aaron Smith of the NCIA at this past week's Lobby Days in Washington. We go inside the Rayburn office building for a day in the life of a cannabis lobbyist.
Really appreciate your boss's position on the issue and want to be here as a resource.
Plus, the Pennsylvania Senate rejects the House bill to set up a state-run cannabis operation in the Keystone State, while Alabama Governor Kay Ivey bans all CBD smokable hemp products, basically shutting down that side of the industry in that state. And we'll hear from our new Alabama correspondent, Jennifer Boozer, on the impact for her business.
And unfortunately, after 7 years of good business, we just had a bill pass, HB 445, that will now knock out 90% of our products and set up regulations that are so much stricter than any other industry, including alcohol, that none of us will be able to stay in business.
I'm PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, here in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital for Lobby Days, courtesy of the National Cannabis Industry Association. And we'll have a report from Washington, D.C. after this on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who's off this week. I apologize. But she will be back on June 2nd, and we start with our first reminder to download the free PCM TV app available now on Google Play and the App Store. On that app, you'll find documentation of the past 4 years of the fight to end cannabis prohibition, with new shows that we've produced with a minimum of 10,000 views apiece on YouTube. Now, before you jump out of this video, I won't be alone introducing our news stories this week. I'm Jimmy Young in Massachusetts.
I'm Amy Carter in Michigan.
I'm Karen Black in Arizona.
I'm Kimmy Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report.
I'm Tina Tasaka from Nevada.
We start this week in our nation's capital of Washington, D.C., where Jimmy Young spent last week at the NCIA's Lobby Days. You know Jimmy as the founder of PCM TV, host of the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast with Aaron Smith, and the executive producer of this Cannabis Coast to Coast news show. This week, however, Jimmy turned into a lobbyist. More accurately, he shadowed a lobbyist to see exactly how our government works. Here's Jimmy's report from our nation's capital.
Well, here we are in the nation's capital, and for those of you who don't recognize the U.S. Capitol building, that, of course, is where all the House of Representatives and the Senate meet to make the votes on the laws that dictate what we are doing here in the United States of America. But as you guys know, I'm here because of our relationship with the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association, and they're a group of lobbyists that represent the businesses and in the industry of cannabis. But all those votes and laws are done at the Capitol, but it's over here across the street at the Rayburn Center where all the deals are made. And you'll never guess where they're made. They're made in a cafeteria over coffee. That's how this country works. These are the halls of the Rayburn office building in Washington, D.C., where legislative aides, congressmen, movers, and shakers go from one meeting to another or meet at the famous Rayburn cafeteria for a snack or a face-to-face meeting or negotiation.
So many of the challenges that the industry face can only be solved right here in the nation's capital, from ending to ADE, to expanding access to banking services, and ultimately resolving the failure of marijuana prohibition so that our industry can be treated just like any other industry, fairly.
2 floors below that cafe, you'll find some tunnels that connect to the Capitol building across the street, or you can even save a few steps by taking a tram. Plus, you never know who might be walking in that sub-basement. I mean, isn't that Congressman Dave Joyce from Ohio? He's the sponsor of the States 2.0 Act.
Bring to the stage Congressman Dave Joyce.
I think in this administration, they've got a lot on their plate at the moment. But we have a president who's been debanked. We have a president who's said that in Florida that it should be at least rescheduled and allowed to be used to its full potential for medical research. All the things we've been asking for.
It's time for the federal government to catch up to what the states have been doing. And if we can't catch up, but I'm an optimist, I think we have a shot at it. But if we can't catch up, we at least need to get out of the way. I have a number of your businesses in my district, which is the heart of Las Vegas. I hope you'll come and see me there. I'll return the hospitality. And I look forward to partnering with you because, you know, the more this passes at the state level, the more you have representatives who've got to pay attention to their constituents' needs, whether it's small business or veterans or just recreational users. And so they're starting to listen. So we just got to keep making that noise. And as I said in an article I wrote for the Harvard Law Review, let's just puff, pass that bill.
Amen.
The National Stakeholder Summit that kicked off the NCIA's lobby days on Tuesday featured a panel of regulators from Maryland, New York, and Jillian Shower from Canada, who had a warning for all.
We've seen lots of challenge in states that have had different bills to regulate hemp for all different reasons, but the longer that it stays largely unregulated in finished product form, I think the more likely it is that we see one bad actor create one situation that puts in question the entirety of the industry.
Lobby days were all about the 100-plus meetings people from the NCIA set up in congressional offices. They even offered some advice from an aide from Senator Ron Wyden's office.
The number one thing that I appreciate when folks are coming in on any given issue is just taking a moment to level set and establish kind of each person's knowledge base for the issue.
So with that in mind, I was thrilled to tag along with Aaron Smith for my first meeting as a cannabis advocate with Jeremy Title, Chief of Staff from California Rep. Salud Carvajal's office.
You know, really appreciate your boss's position on the issue and want to be here as a resource.
Committee reconciliation hearing is they basically take in pieces of the Farm Bill as it relates to production of agriculture, are folding it into this reconciliation package along with these huge cuts to the SNAP program.
Later that day, I even ran into my new friend, Jennifer Lamboy from Hybrid Marketing, who I met at MJ Unpacked just 2 weeks ago in New Jersey.
I'm Jenny Lamboy with Hybrid Marketing Co. I'm here with my friend Jerry, and I'm curious to know, what does it mean for you to be here at NCIA's Lobby Days?
Well, for me, it started when I was 15 years old, and I've always been kind of on the advocacy side of cannabis. It just means a ton to me to be doing my civic duty, advocating for cannabis, talking to the lawmakers, and ultimately making my mark with them as it pertains to how this thing goes over the next several decades.
Lobby Days is really exciting for me because you actually feel like you make an impact and you get to go into these different representatives' offices, and I never thought that we had that power.
Being here with Lobby Days with NCIA is an opportunity to represent an industry I'm so proud to be a part of and to represent others that represent businesses, brands that change people's lives every day. It's an opportunity to unify the plant. We are representing hemp and marijuana, which right now I believe is a temporary conversation, but we can dig into that later. But ultimately, I believe that this is an opportunity to influence change and improved regulation to make our industry stronger and safer in the future.
For me, it means that I actually got to a place in my career where I can do things like this and make an effort to make a difference in legislation, supporting small businesses. It's just really exciting to have an opportunity to do something.
I'm here with my friend Chris Crane, who just won the Excellence in Advocacy Award for the NCIA, and I'm curious to know, what does it mean for you to be here at NCIA's Lobby Days?
This is, I think, the most important event of the year, and certainly the one I look forward to the most. This is the one time a year when members of Congress and their staff actually get to hear from people in the cannabis industry about how these policies and these laws are directly impacting their businesses on a day-to-day. There's nothing more impactful for these legislators than hearing directly from the people whose lives and businesses are impacted. And we get an opportunity to do that this week.
We will have more from Mr. Young goes to Washington trip for the NCIA's lobby days later on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. For now, I'm Jimmy Young reporting.
Jimmy's appearance in our nation's capital wasn't the only story coming out of DC this week. Remember the story from about 3 weeks ago about the federal DOJ attorney, Ed Martin? He was looking to use federal laws to cite a cannabis dispensary in the district for being too close to 4 schools in their neighborhood. Well, this week, Ed Martin was replaced by former Fox show host Jeanine Pirro in order to take another position with the new administration. Before he left, he held a news conference where he explained his actions of targeting the location of that dispensary after hearing from one disgruntled parent.
We listen to the community. The community's up in arms that we have cannabis, marijuana, pop-up shops and shops all over the place. What gathers around those places is not healthy. It's not helpful. And again, the D.C. City Council has laws that appear to contradict federal law. I was down in Georgetown. These aren't Republicans. These aren't conservatives. These family members who are saying, hey, we don't want a store within 1,000 feet of a school, right? We want, and not only one, by the way, it's 4 schools within 1,000 feet of a pot dispensary, a pot shop. So those are the policies you hear when you listen to the people.
Here's one of the most interesting things about Washington, D.C. Right behind me is the Wishing Wellness, which is one of the medical dispensaries that are available to the public who has a medical card. I have a medical card, so I'm going to go check it out and see what a DC dispensary is all about in the shadow of the U.S. Capitol.
Inside the wellness dispensary in D.C. was the usual display of different strains in flower, pre-rolls, vapes, edibles, plus a unique feature, a well from the 19th century.
So before there was plumbing or aqueducts in the city, this actually used to be a communal to get water. It was made around 1840 or so, and it actually predates the building.
Do they overstep their bounds with you guys? Shouldn't you just be left alone at this point?
It's just a bit of a tricky situation to navigate because, according to DC, we had to be 400 feet away from a school or a library or things like that. But then when you take a look at the federal level, that number is increased to 1,000 feet. So it's just kind of the contrast between the federal and the local level, definitely giving you a bit of a conflicting piece of information. But, we just try to operate within the realms of what is, capable for us to do and try and, follow the rules as best we can.
A very strange incident in Oklahoma this week. A software glitch led to the notice of the cancellation of a number of licenses in that state, throwing that industry into a bit of a panic. Here's Kimmy Cannabis in Oklahoma with that story.
I'm Kimmy Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The industry was in a bit of chaos this week as the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority worked to fix a serious glitch in its licensing system. On May 14th, they announced that their Thentia system error had accidentally canceled thousands of business licenses. Business owners were flooding social media, confused and concerned, wondering if they were still legally allowed to operate. OMMA quickly responded, assuring licensees they could continue operating and asked those affected to report the issue through the contact form on the website. By May 16th, the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority confirmed the problem had been fully resolved. All canceled licenses were restored and the root cause was addressed in cooperation with the licensing vendor. They apologized for the confusion and thanked the community for their patience and understanding. But that's not all. OMMA has also reported a scam alert that's been targeting license holders. Someone posing as an OMMA agent has been calling businesses, demanding they wire $5,000 or more for fake violations. Here's the twist. When some business owners returned the call, it even answered as OMMA. Although it wasn't the same number that they used, it added to the scam's credibility. OMMA is clear. They will never call you to demand money via wire transfer. If you get a suspicious call like this, report it immediately at omma.ok.gov/contact. That is it from Oklahoma. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
In Pennsylvania this week, the Senate rejected that state's bill passed by their House of Representatives to open an adult use legal market run by that state. Last week, we had immediate negative reaction on that development from Claudia Post, an advocate in that state, and from CEO of Ethos Cannabis, Gibran Washington. Now they will turn to the Senate to support one of the bills that is being discussed that can lead to a legal adult use market. The good news of Pennsylvania, at least this week, there will be no drama from their governor, Josh Shapiro, who wants to open adult use legalization. Now let's check out what's going on in California, where a looming tax hike is set to go into effect July 1st, and it continues to threaten the hemp industry there.
Yarrow Kubrin reporting from Northern California. What's happened in the last week and a half? We've had an opening of a new Jane dispensary in bougie Healdsburg, Sonoma County. We also have had the Sonoma County Environmental Impact Report that has finally been published. Years in the waiting. This is going to impact permitting and policy locally. We've got until July 15th to provide feedback. Lastly, Cal Poly Humboldt, in association with UC Berkeley, the Origins Council, United Core Alliance, and LeafWorks, is continuing their research with a community participation tour. This spring tour throughout key geographic regions of California is studying intellectual property, the history of the cannabis genetics and cultures in these areas, and has been incredible. They just had their meeting in Sonoma County yesterday at the Hessel Grange. The Hessel Grange is the first Grange in the United States to have a cannabis program, and the leader of that program is also the vice president of the Granges here in California. So a lot of exciting stuff going on in this region. This is Yarrow Kubrin reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Arizona this week, there was a lot going on once again. Another testing lab gets busted for enhancing results, and now Curaleaf gets a European medical certification for a handheld liquid inhalation device. Here's Karen Black with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Arizona health officials have cited Kaicha Labs, one of the state's largest, for more than a dozen violations, including unreliable potency and contaminant testing, incomplete records, and failing to properly distinguish between Delta 8 and Delta 9 THC. Some issues were flagged in previous years, raising concerns about oversight and product safety. Kaicha Labs remains open with no recalls issued, but regulators have given the company 30 days to respond and may impose penalties. Industry leaders warn these violations could impact public health and trust in Arizona's cannabis market. Governor Katie Hobbs has signed a sweeping new law restricting cannabis advertising. The law bans ads targeting anyone under 21, including ads using cartoons, toys, or child-friendly branding. Ads are now prohibited on public transit, in airports, and on billboards near schools and parks. Digital ads are only allowed if most of the audience is 21 or older, and every ad must display a prominent health warning. Violators can be fined up to $20,000, and the rules take effect July 1st, 2026. The other two remaining cannabis bills are stalled as lawmakers focus on the state budget. One would direct medical marijuana fund dollars to FDA-approved clinical cannabis research, while the other aims to expand rural licensing opportunities. Both measures remain on hold as the legislative session winds down. And finally, Arizona's cannabis industry is facing a sharp downturn, with first quarter sales in 2025 dropping more than 13% from last year. Medical sales plunged 28% to $52 million, while adult use sales fell to $261 million, nearly a 10% drop. This slump has led to dramatic job losses, with Arizona losing half its cannabis workforce in the past year, the steepest decline of any state. Market saturation, competition, and economic pressures are all contributing factors. Insiders also warn that rapid turnover may be affecting customer service, with concerns that Arizona bud tenders are less knowledgeable than before. As the market matures, falling sales, fewer jobs, and a less experienced workforce are raising new questions about the industry's future. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block, our first section of the Cannabis Coast to Coast news, but we have plenty more coming up in our B block, our next section, including more state reports, and next up, our international segment with Ben Stevens in Europe and Debbie Facey in Canada. Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
We focus solely on the cannabis space. The cannabis is not just another item that we've put on our website and said, oh, we're in cannabis. We do cannabis and cannabis only, and we focus on cannabis day in and day out. So with Buds Group, we're going to not only work with you and give you advice, we're going to help see your project through to completion, and you're going to find at the end of the day, it'll be a fraction of a cost of working with a larger firm because our executives are focused just on cannabis and we run lean.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Jimmy Young, filling in for Elena Pinto, who will be back for our next show, scheduled to be released on Monday, June 2nd. Next up, our international reports. Europe has a number of countries who are slowly reforming their long-existing prohibitions and introducing medical programs. France and Spain are making plans for a vibrant medical market, and last week, Ben Stevens outlined Denmark's plans for a medical program. In April, Slovenia introduced legislation that will regulate the cultivation, production, and trade of cannabis for medical and scientific purposes. With more from Europe, here's Ben Stevens with a story about a company that just couldn't survive.
Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's news from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. One of the UK's few remaining pharmaceutical cannabis companies, Oxford Cannabinoid Technology Holdings, appears to have entered administration. While there's not yet been an official public statement from the company, we've seen numerous documents, including a notice in the UK's public record of insolvency proceedings, confirming that administrators were appointed on May the 2nd. OCT, as it's more commonly known, has long relied on investor funding to push forward its clinical trials, a common story in early-stage biotech. But as global investment in biotech continues to tighten, it seems OCT has become the latest casualty. The company was working on a promising pipeline of cannabinoid-based drugs, including a lead treatment for neuropathic pain, which was expected to enter phase 2 clinical trials this year. It held patents across the US, China, Europe, and beyond, and had an exclusive licensing deal with Canopy Growth for a large portfolio of cannabinoid derivatives. Now, this deal and its intellectual property has now, which includes a library of 2,000 proprietary compounds, has now become one of the company's most valuable assets and potentially a major opportunity for any firm able to pick it up and carry it forward. This doesn't just reflect the struggles of drug developers, but it speaks to a wider crisis across the biotech industry globally. Regulatory uncertainty, cuts to federal health agencies, and a sharp decline in investment, particularly in the US, where OCT, alongside almost every ambitious biotech firm, saw its future, have left many small and mid-sized firms unable to stay afloat. OCT had even announced plans to leave the public markets last year, hoping that private investment would be easier to access. But a planned 10 million raise launched in March appears to have fallen short, and now its future lies in the hands of administrators. It's another major loss for the UK's already struggling medical cannabis and biotech sectors, and a reminder of how difficult it remains to turn scientific promise into commercial reality without serious, sustained backing. That's all for me from this week. I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Peace. The recent study is published in the International Journal of Drug Policy, indicating that Canada legalizing of the non-medical cannabis has significantly shifted the consumer spending from illegal to legal, which is great. Between October 2021 and September 2022, Canadians spent an estimated $6.72 billion on cannabis, $5.2 billion, which is around 78%, from legal sources, and $1.49 billion from illegal sources. The legal market estimates closely matched with the federal retail sales data, underscoring these studies' accuracy. The study emphasizes the importance of analyzing consumer behavior to understand the market trends and suggesting the provincial differences in the legal and the illicit market. This is going to be something that's going to be working way more research, but hopefully will be coming with a greater, result. That's what we have is that Ghost Shop is alleging that the Health Canada was unfair in targeting them. Bernardio, previous to this data late, which is the CEO of Ghost Drop, has contended that Health Canada's $550,000 fine, which is now $250,000 fine, is an attempt to publicly use them as an example by asserting the company has been under the disproportionate, oh my God, I was so sorry. They've been under scrutiny since 2022. These are penalties stemming from the alleged not complying with the marketing and packaging, including their bright pink jar, and participation in promotional events like Halloween theme days. These things to Health Canada are marketing to the youth, but at the same time, in my eyes, it really isn't, especially if youth aren't supposed to be there. Bernardio argues that the enforcement is inconsistent and the compliance are being potentially influenced by competitors, and calls for more equitable regulations allowing direct consumer engagement while safeguarding the youth. And I totally agree with that. This is something that we are seeing across the board, but like I had said before, Health Canada has re-evaluated some of their marketing techniques and have introducing the aspect of clear jars and clear packaging. So I'm hoping this is something that's going to be able to be beneficial to not only the consumers, but to the LPs and the brands such as Ghost Drops. This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report.
Peace. The state of Texas continues to serve as a battle for democracy and the future of the hemp industry in that state. Now that a court has ruled that local cities and towns cannot enact laws that contradict state laws, law enforcement officers in Austin aren't sure they want to enforce them. In 2022, voters in Austin, the state capital, approved a ballot question that decriminalized the possession of cannabis. Now the state has a court decision that says not only are those laws invalid, but now they are trying to pass a law that won't allow any ballot questions on the legality of cannabis. Austin was one of the first cities to pass a decriminalization measure, and another 6 localities followed. Now let's check in with Tina Tasaka in Nevada with her Tribal Lands Report. Tina?
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians broke ground in April 2024 on a large indoor cannabis cultivation facility, part of a broader strategy to establish a sovereign cannabis economy. While the tribe currently permits medical marijuana, officials are eyeing future recreational sales as laws shift. The facility is expected to be operational by late 2025, creating jobs and economic growth. The tribe legalized medical cannabis in 2022 and began issuing licenses in early 2025. There's a special event this week in Las Vegas and why you should attend the MCBA Equity Workshop Tour being held Thursday, May 22nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. You can register on eventhigh.io. This event isn't your average panel series. It's a hands-on, mission-driven experience. The Minority Cannabis Business Association is hosting a powerful workshop built around interactive roundtables to accelerate collaboration and real-world problem solving. Why bring in government officials and regulators? Because understanding the rules and influencing them is key to lasting impact. This curating forum puts you face to face with the people shaping cannabis policy. Shout out to the Chamber of Cannabis. Key speakers and leaders include Kara Cronkite, Nevada CCB, Brandon Wygand, Nevada Cannabis Association, Rihanna Durrett, UNLV Cannabis Policy Institute, Jessica Velasquez, Mike Lamudo, Naomi Granger, Kima Ogden, and more. This will be moderated by Chandler Cooks. Special thank you to all of our sponsors and partners who believed in the vision of the EWT. If you're building in cannabis and want to connect with regulators, investors, and change makers, this is the room to be in. That's it for the Nevada Highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Center for Disease Control announced this week that there were 30,000 fewer deaths in the U.S. thanks to drug overdoses. Now, this is not related to cannabis, but we have to wonder why the statistic in this. Think about this. There were 30,000 fewer deaths in 2024, and that represents the largest decline in 1 year since the CDC started tracking overdose deaths over the past 45 years. Now, up until this year, 4% year over year was the largest decline. Now, you have to wonder about the fact that Americans are consuming more cannabis now than alcohol on a daily basis. And with nearly half the states in the U.S. having adult use legal programs, maybe people are using the plant medicine instead of going on opioids for their pain and other ailments. Now let's check in what's going on in Michigan with Amy Carter.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is your weekly Michigan report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. There's been a lot of buzz lately, so let me roll it up for you. First up, boxing superstar Clarissa Shields is back in Detroit on July 26th. She'll be taking on New Zealand's Lanny Daniels at Little Caesars Arena to defend her undisputed women's heavyweight title. After a little hiccup with a positive marijuana test, no worries, she cleared her name and got her suspension lifted on March 14th. Clarissa says, I've never smoked weed, but hey, 3 nanograms, that's like a crumb from the snack table. Now, onto some broccoli news. Jars Cannabis has found a hilarious loophole to run ads on TV. They aired a cheeky 30-second spot featuring broccoli. Turns out you can wiggle around the rules as long as you don't actually mention weed. Talk about a clever crop. In other news, Michigan Weedsters is hosting a lobby day. A new bill is making waves that could allow cops to use saliva swabs to test for THC and other substances. While it's already legal in 24 states, critics argue that tech isn't really reliable enough to determine if someone's too high to drive. We all know we don't want any unnecessary police interference with our green. And listen up, there's some important legislation that could impact medical marijuana patients and recreational users, with proposals like a 32% wholesale tax and a statewide license moratorium. We could stray from the voter-approved principles of the MRTMA. Plus, roadside testing has serious flaws and could unfairly penalize medical users under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act who still have THC in their system after use. I will keep you guys informed, but let's come together to advocate for fair cannabis regulations that respect the rights of patients and residents. Mark your calendars for this Tuesday, May 20th at 9 a.m. at the Anderson Building in Lansing. Your voice matters. Let's ensure our rights are upheld and keep Michigan a leader in compassionate cannabis regulation. Let's make these bills and proposals go up in smoke. That's it for this week. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and this is Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most controversial developments during the onslaught of cannabis adult use markets is what to do about drivers who get behind the wheel while under the influence of cannabis. Since this plant medicine impacts humans differently based on their metabolism and endocannabinoid system, some are able to tolerate a larger dose of the product than others. On top of that, THC stays in your system for 30 days, so a blood test isn't really fair. The other thing that's not really fair is when law enforcement officers profile drivers for operating under the influence when they detect the potent smell of cannabis. In New York this week, Governor Kathy Hochul wanted smelling the product to be a reason to stop drivers. She even added it into their budget only to see their legislature wipe that amendment off the books this week. Many states are still trying to figure out ways to gauge impairment versus use, especially with individuals having different tolerance for the plant medicine. Now let's check in with our new Massachusetts correspondent, Curtis Emery, with the Bay State Cannabis Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Massachusetts with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The CCC continues to change. This week we bid farewell to Commissioner Nuris Camargo, who announced on May 12th she'll be stepping down from her position. Elected in 2020, Camargo's seat was set to expire this September. Camargo's seat will be filled temporarily for the next 4 months until they can vote on a permanent replacement. Camargo will be missed. She's best known for helping move mass regulation forward with social justice at its core. Mass regulators have launched a new online tool to help those interested in employment in the industry find just that. It's called EquityWorks Career Hub, and it aims to help the industry share jobs with the public and the public find access to employment and training within the cannabis industry. Social justice is at its heart. In fact, when it launches on June 19th, it will only be open to those in the CCC's equity program. This is aimed to help those most disenfranchised by the prohibition on marijuana find their foot in the door of Massachusetts' thriving $8 billion industry. We can thank the CCC's equity program and community outreach department for this wonderful tool. It'll be great to see how this helps not only broaden the industry, but make the industry more inclusive to those on the outskirts of mass cannabis. I have been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago clone guy here, reporting from just outside of Chicago, Illinois for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is Bird. Thanks for tuning in. Lots of stuff always going on here in Illinois. One good thing going on here is SB 42 is the new bill that I've been talking about recently that would eliminate police being able to search and search your vehicle for the odor of smoked or raw cannabis in your vehicle, and it would eliminate the requirement for cannabis to be in a sealed, smell-proof container. That passed committee, so that's good. That's moving forward. Another interesting fact here in Illinois is that a couple counties are allowed to increase taxes on cannabis in addition to the Illinois retail tax. So there's actually 2 counties that are going to add a few percent on it just because they can. And they're actually not Chicago counties, which is kind of surprising too. But I think it's Macon and Logan County are going to increase taxes on cannabis. Like there isn't already enough taxes on cannabis. In bad news, there was a lady, a 49-year-old lady in Wheeling, Illinois, that decided it was going to be a good idea to give edibles to children at a park. And I was curious, like, okay, you know, kids, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15. She gave edibles to children that were 2 years old through 9 years old. 4 kids, edibles, messed them all up. They had to go to the hospital. What a moron. But I thought that was interesting here in Chicagoland. And actually, Wheeling is up north of Chicago, but that was interesting to hear. But she got arrested, rightfully so, and thrown in jail. What an idiot. But yeah, that sums up the news for the Chicago land and Illinois surrounding areas, obviously here. I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One of the most respected employment recruiters in the cannabis space is Vankst. This week, they teamed up with Bo Whitney from Whitney Economics to release their jobs report for 2024. And despite a total of just over $30 billion in revenue, there was a decline in jobs. Here are some of the highlights of this dual economic report. That $30.1 billion total in revenue is a 4% increase year over year, while the total number of available jobs decreased by 3% from 2023. New York, Mississippi, and Ohio showed the most growth, but the biggest decline came in mature markets like Colorado, Illinois, and Arizona. Bo Whitney is still bullish on the industry and expects revenues to grow by 13% this year to reach a total of $34 billion. Not much change in the public markets when they heard this news, but Curaleaf's European Union approval for an inhalation device might have given them a little bit of a boost at the stock market. Let's hear from our guy who's high on Wall Street, Doug Miller, on just what kind of a week was it for the publicly traded stocks. Here's Doug.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Tilt Holdings takes bold steps toward becoming a lean, mean vaporization machine. In Q1 2025, Tilt posted $22.7 million in revenue, down from its $37.5 million year over year, mainly due to its changes in its Jupiter hardware business. Cash flow operations flipped positive to $1.9 million, up from a loss last year. CEO Tim Condor says Tilt is going Jupiter first, offloading retail dispensaries in Massachusetts and focusing on scalable asset-light operations. Jupiter's making moves, earning EU medical device certification for its QMID vaporizer and expanding globally with Curaleaf. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around 0.004 cents and it's pulling back, so watch for dips because then it'll set up and get ready to run. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Well, that'll do it for the B block or second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but don't go away. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed a bill banning many hemp products in that state that continues to shoot itself in the foot since it's been 4 years since voters passed a medical bill and they have yet to open up one dispensary. I don't even think they've given out a license. Anyway, I got to talk with a new Alabama correspondent. She's also a cannabis advocate and a radio show host in Alabama. Her name's Jennifer Boozer, and I'll introduce you to her after this.
Alabama has, and unfortunately, after 7 years of good business, we just had a bill pass, HB 445, that will now knock out 90% of our products and set up regulations that are so much stricter than any other industry, including alcohol, that none of us will be able to stay in business if this loss.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Welcome back to the Seed Block, our final section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Jimmy Young. Yes, Elena Pinto will be back for our next show on June 2nd, and hopefully by then, you'll have downloaded the PCMTZ app. It's now available at the App Store and Google Play. All you have to do is scan that QR code. Plus, you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're up to over 15,000 now, but we could use a few more. And as we continue to grow our reach, we want to get back to our state reports. And this time, we head to the Mile High state of Colorado, where sales are tanking so far in 2025. Xavier Jallet is our man in Colorado, and here's his report for this week.
I'm Xavier Jallet, chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and an attorney at the McDonald Hopkins law firm. And this is what's happening in Colorado cannabis news this week. I've got two stories to report on, sombering stories for the Colorado cannabis industry. The first is that Colorado sales are down $20 million for the first 2 months of 2025, as reported by the Marijuana Enforcement Division, reflecting a continued downward trend for the Colorado market since 2017, 2018, and of course the COVID era where cannabis was declared essential. So unfortunate news for sales in the Colorado industry for the first few months of 2025. And the second story is that House Bill 25-1209, which was a bill to allow retailers and brands to provide samples to customers and to increase purchase limits from 1 ounce daily to 2 ounces daily for the recreational side of things, unfortunately did not pass the House in Colorado and will not become law. So sales are down, and some bills that would help the industry with purchase limits and providing samples in Colorado, unfortunately, are the two stories for this week. And it reflects kind of an ongoing challenge that the Colorado industry has dealing with regulators and lawmakers since the Colorado industry, quite frankly, came online in 2014, pushing back against things that would help Colorado marijuana and cannabis businesses progress and move forward like we do see in some other states. So that's it for Colorado cannabis news this week. My name's Xavier Jallet, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Texas House of Representatives passed a bill this week that would see the state expand its already existing but struggling medical marijuana program. The list of qualifying conditions has expanded to include chronic pain, glaucoma, traumatic brain injury, spinal neuropathy, Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, degenerative disc disease, and any terminal patients in hospice or palliative care. Military veterans would also be allowed to register as cannabis patients so they can gain access for their PTSD or other ailments. Considering the legislature is still trying to figure out how to control their hemp industry, this is a major step towards positive reform for the Lone Star State. This bill now moves into the Senate in Texas. Now, let's check in with Joe Parsons in Virginia.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I have some sobering news to report for this week, as according to the Virginia State Police, there's an alarming increase in the amount of teenage vape use that's going on in the Commonwealth. We're not just talking about the vape use that comes from nicotine, we're talking about the vape use that comes from THC derivatives that are found in almost every convenience store in Virginia. In 2021, we as a people voted to put cannabis behind a safe, regulated, and age-verified counter. And ever since then, our governor, Glenn Youngkin, has done nothing except make sure that that does not become a reality. The problem lies that convenience stores don't really care what they're selling. They don't really care who they're selling to. They only care that they're selling products. And without these products being tested and verified, then there's no telling who they can wind up with. So if you haven't already done so, people, now's the time to contact your local senators, your congressmen, anybody that will listen. And especially whatever candidate you choose to be the next governor, you need to write them a letter, write them an email, send them a phone call, and let them know that our children deserve better, that we deserve better. The cannabis needs to be put behind that age-verified counter the way that we, the people, voted to make sure that our children would be safe. So, if you haven't already done it, now is the time. And another good way to help out is just to simply subscribe to Pro Cannabis Media. The more that we get our voices out, the more that everyone will know that this is a real problem and something that needs to be addressed. So, that's going to do it for this week from the Virginia Cannabis Connection and reporting from Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As always, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
One of the major themes and hot topic this past week in Washington, D.C. a few lobbying days is what to do about hemp. Now that the cannabis light version of the plant is established all over the country in both adult use legal and adult use illegal states for its potent Delta-9 cousin, both sides, of course, of the plant want regulation and guide about how best to infuse food and beverages with this product, and of course, where to sell it. And if the FDA had actually done their job when the Farm Bill passed in 2018, we wouldn't be here right now, but that's in the past. The future is the great unknown. Perry Hinkle is our new hemp reporter, and his report this week looks at Delaware and the battle that's brewing there with big alcohol. Here's Kerry Hinkle.
This is Kerry Hinkle from Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and this is your hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, we head up to the Northeast in Delaware, where they are the latest state to try and implement some much-needed regulations on hemp products. The problem? As I've reported in past weeks, this has big alcohol written all over it. And that's because hemp beverages would only be allowed to be sold in licensed package stores. And so, while the intent of the legislature is to regulate hemp beverages like beer and wine, they're not allowing hemp beverages to be sold where beer and wine is sold. This means bans on-premise consumption of THC beverages in places like bars and restaurants. You know, in our tap room in Houston, we dispense hemp beverages on draft with kegs, and consumers love it. And we want to see this type of normalization and adoption of hemp beverages for on-premise consumption spread across the country. And so we're pushing hard against that ban of on-premise consumption of hemp beverages in the state of Delaware. The bill would also ban grocery store and convenience stores from being allowed to be sold hemp beverages. And you know what is sold right now in convenience stores, in grocery stores in the state of Delaware? Beer and wine. And so if you want to regulate this like beer and wine, just let us be sold where and how beer and wine is currently sold. And so we have heard reports on the ground that there has been positive movement after the committee hearing this week to understand the issues with the bill and to hopefully open up some retail access of these products. But as in all things policy, the devil is in the details. So we are going to monitor closely as a House floor amendment could be adopted in the coming weeks that would expand retail access. But again, we won't know until we see the amendment and what the language exactly looks like. As always, hemp policy never stops. So this is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp, and I will see you again next week for another hemp report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
If you look around the country, you won't find many states as dysfunctional as Alabama. That state voted in a medical program 4 years ago, and they have yet to open up one store or even issue one license that hasn't led to a lawsuit. Jennifer Boozer hosts a local radio show in the Cotton State, and she also runs a hemp shop with a variety of CBD products that now have to be taken off the shelf since Governor Kay Ivey basically just banned all intoxicating hemp products. PCM TV founder Jimmy Young was introduced to Jennifer by Michigan's Amy Carter, and Jennifer will be our Alabama correspondent moving forward. Here's Jimmy with the host of the Sweet Home Cannabana podcast.
Thanks, Karen. Yes, we are very excited to introduce you to a new contributor to the Cannabis Coast to Coast news team. Her name is Jennifer Boozer, and she is a well-known personality in Alabama. That's right. Now do the quick thing in your mind. Alabama has cannabis? Yes, they do. Jennifer's an advocate. She knows the history. She's been in the trenches. Her show is Sweet Home Cannabama. Jennifer Boozer, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Jimmy, for having me. I'm very excited to get to connect with you guys in the news.
Well, more importantly, you're in the South, okay? And I'm up in Massachusetts, and we've got coast to coast coverage: California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Michigan, of course, with Amy Carter. We give her credit because she's the one who introduced us.
Yes.
And then we get into the Northeast and the East, and we have Washington, D.C., and Virginia, and Maryland, and New Jersey, New York. I've had Connecticut, I've had Maine, I've had New Hampshire, I've had Vermont. We're always looking for new contributors to this program because I believe, and you understand this, every state is different, isn't it, Jennifer?
Oh my goodness. Did you say a mouthful? Yes. And I know that Alabama is the last on the list for anybody outside of Alabama to actually have legalized or have any access or information or good education.
Yeah. So again, go back to what we've talked about, which is give me a quick recap of the history of cannabis and hemp, because you're involved in that industry. You're in that industry.
Right.
What goes on in Alabama? I do know this, that they've had 4 years to get something going, and they haven't been able to do it because they've been in court the whole time over 4 years. That's how much.
Yes. As far as medical cannabis goes, we finally got the bill passed in 2021. And it has been 4 years. They actually issued licenses 3 different times. They give them, take them back, give them, take them back. There were these lawsuits. Now Alabama, always one of the main people suing, has gone to the federal courts. I'm sure everybody has seen that in the news this week. Not sure if that's anything but a PR stunt because they're not winning in Alabama. Well, all it's doing is holding up the patients. At the end of the day, that's what I care about, and I'm in the hemp industry. Thankfully, I can stand in the gap for those people. We are the only access that Alabama has. And unfortunately, after 7 years of good business, we just had a bill pass, HB 445, that will now knock out 90% of our products and set up regulations that are so much stricter than any other industry, including alcohol, that none of us will be able to stay in business if this law stands. So the people of Alabama went from having wide access to a free market of hemp products and at least a passed bill with the potential to someday be open dispensaries, although it's 37 for 67 counties and a national embarrassment. We are all that Alabama has had, and now they're taking all of it away all at once with the stroke of a pen. And that just happened 2 days ago.
Yeah, and I'm glad that we're talking this week. I certainly knew that news item and all that. What can happen next? Because we're a litigious society here in the United States of America. Our friends, the attorneys and lawyers that are there for us for the reason that they go to school.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, unfortunately, in Alabama, the state legislature likes to do things that aren't exactly constitutional, and they force us to litigate. So we're going to court, of course, if that's the option available to us. We don't want to spend $500,000 fighting our own legislators.
And by the way, this is what bothers me about what's going on in this country, and hemp is right in the middle of it. And Texas is a perfect example because hemp is everywhere. And I think there are 7 cities and towns that actually voted in decriminalization of cannabis. And yet the state doesn't like it, so they're fighting it. Now they've got a court battle on the Constitution, and it's like,
right.
Oh my God, they created this mess when they passed that farm bill in 2018. And they gave the FDA the opportunity to create regulations for a vibrant industry that evolved without regulation because they got no direction from the people that voted it in the first place.
Right.
And
well, and those of us out here are self-regulating. I made my store 21 and up when you could still buy cigarettes at 19 in Alabama. And then when they raised the federal age and the state age to 21, finally, we were already ready doing that. I have a sign on my door, couple, We age gated voluntarily because I don't want some 19-year-old to come in and get a product, not know what they're getting, not listen to me trying to teach them to consume responsibly, have a bad experience, and then their mama goes on Facebook. We don't want that. And we certainly don't know any 6-year-olds who have a driver's license to come down and use their money to buy our products.
Yeah.
We don't sell to children. And that narrative of save the children is so dusty, crusty, and old in Alabama and in the whole country.
Right.
We're not buying it.
Right.
And largely in Alabama, I would like to believe that because of the advocacy efforts of a lot of people, including myself and my radio show that goes out every Monday night for 6 years, nobody in Alabama is scared of cannabis anymore. There's a few outliers, but no one is afraid of it because they understand it now.
So now at least you know where the state of Alabama stands when it comes to hemp products. But they're not the only state with a hemp battle on their hands. In Florida, for instance, two bills that would have regulated that state's hemp industry both stalled in the legislature. And now they sit in limbo since their congressional session is over. Now, when it comes to Florida, we like to check in with our correspondent down there. We call him the Master Gardener. His name is Jeff Aker. And unfortunately, Jeff had a horrible car accident a few months ago. And now, this week, he'll be getting his hip replaced as a result of that accident. I talked with Jeff this week about what's going on with Governor DeSantis and what is he up to now.
You cannot have anybody from like Colorado come down to get signatures, or Georgia standing in front of a dispensary getting signatures for the ballot. You can't have out-of-state people come in. As a matter of fact, due to the fact of my accident, I actually joined the medical marijuana registry here in Florida with my CLPD and my uncomfortable pain. And one day into my trip into one of the dispensaries, I signed a petition that Smart and Safe Florida has put out for the ballot.
As many of you know, last week I was in the nation's capital for Lobby Days hosted by the National Cannabis Industry Association. Their executive director, Aaron Smith, and I are hosting a weekly podcast called The Voice of Cannabis, and we get to go over the issues of the day, and that seems to change on a weekly basis when it comes to cannabis. Now, many states like Texas are trying their best to take the tool of a ballot initiative away from U.S. citizens, and some are trying to make it a permanent policy when it comes to getting the cannabis question on any ballot. Aaron and I debriefed about the NCIA's severe event, those was Lobby Day, and he was proud of the fact that they coordinated over 100 meetings during the two Lobby Days in our nation's capital.
Okay, Aaron, Lobby Days 2025, your 13th annual, is now history in the rearview mirror, as they say. What were your impressions of the last few days in Washington, D.C.?
Well, as always, it was a great advocacy experience for us and for the members of Congress and their staff that participated, and most importantly, the members of NCIA. We took over 100 meetings across Capitol Hill to inform and educate lawmakers on issues like 280E, banking, and the need to end federal prohibition.
Right. And for the most part, can you tell before you go into the meeting, is this going to be a friendly meeting or a confrontational meeting?
Yeah, I mean, you can. I mean, we have voting records for most of these members, and in some of them maybe we don't know because they're freshmen, but you would be surprised they're almost always friendly. Even if their boss, because most of these meetings are with the staff. The staff often support cannabis reform because it's a generational issue and they're younger, typically, and even if their boss doesn't. So you'll always be pleasantly surprised that it's quite a friendly environment and cordial.
And can you take the temperature of Capitol Hill right now? Is there a chance that the States Act has some legs at some point this year?
There's always a chance. It's the challenge right now is there are hundreds of competing issues, and in some ways the world seems like it's on fire, and cannabis reform is one of many other issues that aren't quite on the top of the priority list just yet. So but that's why we're there. That's why we have to keep keep pushing this thing forward, or we'll never get to on top of the list.
And finally tonight, how about hanging out with Snoop Dogg on New Year's Eve this year? After all, this guy seems to be everywhere, and wherever he goes, so does his favorite herb, cannabis. This year, Snoop will be taking his act on the road to Miami, Florida for a 2-hour special on NBC and, of course, their affiliates. Now, they're promoting it as an unforgettable night with Snoop Dogg. Now, being in Miami on December 31st really doesn't sound like it would be a tough assignment, especially if I was 40 years younger, which I am not. Anyway, that will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM TV founder Jimmy Young, reminding you all that it is a whole new world of weed out there, so please learn about it and consume responsibly. We're all going to take the Memorial Day weekend off, so our next news show will be anchored by Elena Pinto on Monday, June 2nd. So we ask you all to have a good, safe holiday weekend, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and thank our veterans for their service to our country.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Welcome to Pro Cannabis Media, your go-to for all things cannabis. PCM is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news and talk shows with a twist. We've got 16 state correspondents and multimedia journalists from around the US and Canada.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Stevie Facey with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
It all started back in 2018 when founder Jimmy Young kicked off the In the Weeds podcast. His mission? Documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition. Fast forward to today and we've got Cannabis Coast to Coast with Elena Pinto, delivering the nation's only TV-style cannabis news show.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast, PCM TV's weekly roundup of industry news from California to New York. I'm Elena Pinto.
As of August 2024, PCM has racked up over 1.2 million views and 14.5 million impressions on our YouTube channel. With 15,000 subscribers and growing, our reach is spreading like wildfire. PCM's website, YouTube, Rumble, Discord, Roku, Twitch, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and even our very own PCM TV app. Get your cannabis news fix with Pro Cannabis Media. We're here to keep you informed and entertained. Stay tuned and stay lifted.